non-critical reading and analysis of surface information, which I find is something a lot of people struggle with. It was either never taught to them, it wasn't taught to them well, it's something they don't even think about. But with the increasing amount of complexity within modern systems, be it automotive, on highway, off highway, it doesn't matter, there is more and more and more information being generated on a daily basis that we need to consume, understand, and be able to utilize to be good at our jobs. We want that first time fix. We want the customer happy. We want to be happy. We don't want to be pulling our hair out trying to interpret something and having no clue where to go and not sure if we missed something. So this is going to be a brief rundown of how I look at things and some of the techniques that I use. So what is critical reading exactly? Well, it's evaluating the text, identifying its strengths and weaknesses. So strengths and weaknesses. With our strengths, we want to know what's clear, what's right off the bat, simple, easy, low-hanging fruit, something that says right off the bat, the ignition switch has to be in the crank position in order for the starter to engage. Simple, yes. Something we want to know and it's easy, yeah. We're going to pull that, we're going to take it, we're going to use it. We also want to keep in the back of our minds when we see information like that, how is this going to play into the other interactions within these systems? So you keep that in your mind. Then we go to the weaknesses and the flaws. With the weaknesses and the flaws, we want to know what they're not telling us. What are we missing? What do we want more information on? Is it going to be under this system? Do we have to research another subsystem? We need to figure that out and jot that down as we're reading through any given passage. When something piques a question, you have to go and say, hey, we're going to keep reading through, we're going to keep evaluating, but let's take this question, pop it off to the side, jot it down real quick, go from there. By the time you get to the end, you may have that question answered, or you may need to answer that question with further research. It all depends on the scenario. We take our strengths, our weaknesses, those notes we've jotted down, and we look at the big picture of the current diagnosis or problem on the vehicle at hand. So with that information, do we have enough with what we just went through to successfully and efficiently diagnose this problem? Do we need to look at more? Do we need to start pulling some live data in to get a direction on where to do further research to better understand the system? These are all the things that a lot of people are doing and they may not realize it or they may struggle with this, and so hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit of a pointer. So the non-critical reading, first step, easiest thing to do. You read what is being said. That's it. You don't look any further, you don't try to interpret, nothing. If it says that you got to stand on your head and spin in a circle in order to get the door to open, you go, okay, that's fine. It's how a lot of trouble trees and flowcharts are written. They want you to take it and do exactly what it says, don't question, they don't care if you understand why you're doing it. They just want a binary yes or no, 1, 0 at the end to send you to the next step. That's where a lot of people get tripped up. That's fine, but there's so much more information to be had other than just the base of what's there. We take our next step to critical reading. We reread the text, and this is my favorite part. We start pulling out the critical information, the abbreviations and acronyms, the larger systems that go into the smaller systems, useful values like engine coolant temperature, engine run time, voltage values, whatever it may be, the stuff that it calls out as part of code set criteria. We care about that. We want to throw that off to the side. If we don't know an acronym, we put that there, we put a question mark next to it, we figure out the acronym as we go along. But we want to pull those little nuggets out because they're going to help us take pages upon pages and paragraphs upon paragraphs of text and condense it down into something small, useful, and helpful for us. We get rid of all the nonsense and we go straight to the goal. After we do that, so we start with our non-critical, we look at it, then we start to pull out the useful stuff, and then we got to critically think about it. So when we're critically thinking, we're applying previous knowledge, experiences, and data. Known good waveforms, known good data values, previous experience with similar year, make, model. similar experience with very similar systems, with similar controllers, wire harness, whatever it may be. Stuff you've dealt with before, you're kind of pulling that from the back of your mind to the front. How can I use this? Does this jive with what I'm dealing with currently? If yes, you're golden. If not, why? What's different? These little things help you to start break a large chunk of information that you have to digest, and allows you to start chipping away. And before you know it, you have a very small nugget of what you need to learn or confirm to properly diagnose the system. So what we're really concerned with are the what, why, where, and how when we're reading this. What are we reading? Are we reading a theory of operation? Are we reading code set criteria? Are we reading trouble trees or flowcharts? Are we reading a fixed database? What are we reading? That's going to determine how much level of information we need and how deeply we need to analyze it. If we're reading theory of operation, we can go pretty deep into interpreting that text and branching off into all different subsystems to really learn. If we're reading code set criteria, well, we're going to just start pulling out those useful data pins. If a code requires it to be 210 degrees Fahrenheit for the engine coolant temperature in order for it to be set, and we know the problem only occurs after 1 hour of driving, we're not super concerned with that engine coolant temperature reading right now. We can throw that out and we can start to look at what are some of the other criteria we do care about. We care about the why are we reading it. What do we hope to gain by reading this? Do we hope to learn a new system from scratch? Do we hope that there's going to be a magical answer in there that says whack it twice with a hammer on the left side and it's going to work every time? Why are we reading it? What do we hope to gain? And is reading this specific section going to allow us to gain that? Something you keep in the back of your mind, and you get faster and faster at making that call the more you do it. Where are we reading it? The old phrase, consider the source. Are we reading it from an OEM service information, website, manual, microfiche, whatever you're using? Are we using an aftermarket informational database? There's errors in OE information, there's errors in aftermarket databases. We need to know that. We need to know what databases are strong with what OEMs. Are we using a forum, an internet forum? What's the quality of that forum? Is it a forum like Diagnostics Network that generally tends to be higher? Is it a IATN? Is it, autodiyfixitcheap.com? You got to consider the source and the quality of the information that you're getting, and keep that in mind. That doesn't mean you can't stumble across good information on a DIY forum. You just have to think critically and really consider it. Social media, same thing. Facebook, ton of great groups out there. A lot of you guys are in them. Same thing, consider the source, consider who's saying it, where they're getting it from, whether or not you can prove it out. Scan tool, same thing. A lot of aftermarket information providers are teaming with different scan tool manufacturers in order to give you an all-in-one package. How updated is that information? Have you let your subscription lapse? Same thing as just dealing with those companies independently. Like Snap-on. You've got your troubleshooter, your connector pinouts, component tests, all built into the Snap-on tools. It's great sometimes. Sometimes it'll lead you astray. Sometimes you need more than what it's giving you. And you got to realize that as well. Use it for what it's good for and realize when you need more. It's the same for any informational source. How are we reading it? Are we reading it because we're in a hurry? We don't want to learn. We don't care. We want somebody to give us a silver bullet. Are we rushed, but we're trying to learn, but we're kind of skimming through and we don't really get to digest all the information? Do we already understand that system? Is it a system we've been dealing with maybe a couple variations for decades? Well, then we don't need to read certain sections, or we can skim through them and just get a refresher. The opposite, if we're learning from scratch, if we've never seen this system before, you're going to have to spend a little more time and think a little more critically and really delve into what that information is telling you. So it's something to keep in mind. What, why, where, how. These all factor into how well we interpret that service information. The analysis. We start with our major topics, engine management, then we start to break it down into subtopics. How is fuel injection controlled? How is ignition, spark, and timing controlled? What are our terminologies and abbreviations we're using? Why are we using something like an ignition mode versus an ignition switch? Two different things, there's a reason we're using two different words. All our different terminologies. I mean, fuel injection control module, fuel pump control module, generic electronic module, totally integrated power module, electronic control module. I mean, you guys have all dealt with the alphabet soup. It gets confusing. We need to know them. If we don't know them, we put them off to the side, we evaluate it, we continue on. So, when we get to structure, what order is the information presented in? Generally, most OEMs put it in a hierarchical manner, meaning at the very top is our core general concept, a very broad base of knowledge. And then it breaks down into subsystems like fuel injection, spark control, air control, whatever it may be. And from there, then breaks it further down into individual components that feed those subsystems. Then, when we're looking at these subsystems or even the larger systems, is all the information we need for it available in one place, or is it broken out into multiple other sections of the service information? Becomes important for something as simple as an ignition or a starting system. The theory of operation and the inputs outputs for the starting system may list everything out, but if you have an anti-theft system on there, that may be listed under accessories, optional components, whatever it may be. That's going to throw additional inputs and outputs into the mix that could send you for a loop if you don't go looking for it. Do these locations make sense, and is the structure useful to your personal needs? What that is that really comes down to evaluating the information source you use. If you use all data and you love the layout, continue using it. If you always use the OE service information, but it's hard to keep up on 35 different manufacturers and how they order things, use the OE information when you need it. Get yourself a good aftermarket information supplier who labels everything and lays it out in a way that makes sense for you. The easier your informational source is to use, the better off you are. Keep in mind though, you still want it as accurate as possible, updated as frequently as possible. So tools and techniques. Everybody loves their tools. These are cheap. Notebook, paper and pen, a whiteboard if you want to get fancy. Do it in your head. I don't care if you take a rock and draw it on the sidewalk. Whatever works for you to start organizing the information as you consume it and to lay out an effective plan. So one of the techniques you'll see talked about a lot is this mind mapping. You draw out a picture, you do all sorts of offshoots, looks kind of like a tree or some crazy octopus. There's countless stuff written on it, and we'll go over it briefly. It works. I use it a lot for learning a system from scratch on my own time, when I'm not pressured for time. So, then there's what's called the deductive order or the inductive orders. So the deductive order is basically you order your information in one way. In this case, you take a generalized problem, complaint, and assemble information relating to it. What could cause that problem or complaint? Say an engine is running rich, it's low on power, traction control comes on, whatever it may be. You take a generalized customer complaint and you start to assemble the information needed to pinpoint your exact spot. Jim Morton calls it the funnels. You start with your big and you move all the way down and allow the information in the funnel to dictate your final point. Inductive order is the reverse. We start with a known failed component, a specific code, whatever it may be. We start with that specific fault, and then we work backwards, step by step, level by level, until we get to a point where we can make a call, make an effective diagnosis. Did another system prevent this from working properly and cause this code? Did another system fall down and create the failure within this part that caused the specific code or the specific failure? These are things we're looking at. So real brief on mind mapping. We start with our core concept, we branch out subtopics, and then from the subtopics we continue to branch out. We can use numbered ordered hierarchies. The thicker the line, the more important. The thinner, the less we care about it. It's great for learning new systems. Not always practical and time efficient when you're in the field, in the shop, under the gun, and you need to get it done effectively and now. So it's generally pretty free-flowing. You can map out fairly complex ideas with it. Once again, it's time-consuming. We get into the types of reasoning, and this is kind of where I use and figure out what I want to know. So we have deductive, inductive, and adductive reasoning. No one is better than the other. They're just different ways of looking at the same problem. So with deductive, we take what we know to be true in general, we take the big end of the funnel, and we work down to a specific case, accumulating data, test results, whatever we need to get to the specific fault in a specific diagnosis. Inductive reasoning, we take basically, think about it this way, we flip our funnel upside down. We have a known fault, lack of fuel injection control, and we work backwards, allowing the funnel to get larger until we get to a section of the system that is not doing what we expect or what it should be doing. And from there, we flip the funnel back over and narrow it down. The funnel may have shifted one direction or the other. We may not be concerned with circuit A, now we want to look at circuit D, but that's what we're doing with inductive. Deductive and inductive work very well together. Abductive, we start with an observation or a set of observations, and then we find the simplest and most likely solution to that. We have 45 voltage codes within a system. What do they share? What do the components share? Do they share a common ground, a common power supply? Is there a section of the car they go to? The simplest solution is normally the right one, Occam's razor. So that's another way. But in any given day, in any given diagnosis, we may start out deductive, go to adductive, because we lack the information we need. We have to make a couple leaps, logical leaps, to get to a point where we can be inductive then or deductive. I mean, they all work together. We're not going to go into logical syllogisms and all that here. This is just the old all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is moral. Different ways of evaluating the same information. And we're going to go briefly on a 13 Silverado 2500 HD, 6-liter, non-compressed natural gas, 4-wheel drive. Alright, so just a quick example of a block diagram and pulling out service information that is useful to the task at hand. So we have our ECM, and we're dealing with an air fuel management system. This vehicle actually is not equipped with one, but doesn't matter. So our ECM, we take our various inputs, and it uses all these logic circuits, everything else, to then output cylinder deactivation solenoid control. That's done through the VLOM, uses engine oil pressure, deactivates the lifter. So we've got mechanical, we've got electric, we've got feedback loops, the whole nine. When we take all those pages and paragraphs of words and narrow them down, especially if an OEM already gives us block diagrams, they're a great starting point. But we take all that stuff and we want to condense it and crystallize it into the most useful format for us. I find block diagrams are the easiest for me, because then I can go through, and if my engine speed is within the criteria, check. Vehicle speed, check. ECT, check. And you narrow it down to exactly what you need. As you're doing this, if you want to draw one of these up, go through. Is that ECT sent directly to the ECM? Is the engine speed sent directly? Does it go anywhere else? Are there network communications involved, in which case we're pulling in another module? These are all things we factor in, we notate. It helps send our direction. And I mean, we've got just a list of criteria for it that we can quickly narrow down with. There is good information, you gotta know where to find it, you gotta know what to take, what to leave. Comes with practice. So now we're going to kick over to the whiteboard here and deal with the starting system. Alright, so what we did here was, as visible as this is, I'm sorry about the glare, we took a real basic system, a starting system for the same truck we were discussing the AFM on, and we drew it out. So, the red here is exactly what our starting system's theory of operation tells us. 2 pages worth of paragraphs, a lot of text. We have exact starter motor operation down to internal armature windings, the whole nine. Most of us don't care about that, right? We understand it, we know how it works, we can throw that out. We understand how it shuts off when the crank signal is removed. Starter relay opening, what happens there? The fields of the pull-in and hold-in windings for the solenoid, we don't care about that. This particular one isn't a start-stop solenoid one, or a start-stop vehicle. So we can throw that information out. We're already halfway through this by reading critically. We don't care about it. Now, we get into actual circuit description. So ignition mode switch for keyless start, we look at the ignition mode switch. It's placed in the crank position, signal is supplied to the BCM, and it notates that the ignition is in our start or in the crank position. So without a key, right here, ignition mode is in crank. So this goes back to what I was saying. There's a reason we use specific words within service information. Ignition mode is quite different than ignition switch, isn't it? I would say so. So if we're using remote vehicle start, keyless entry, whatever, ignition mode is going to send out a signal saying it's in crank. It's going to go into our BCM. Our BCM is going to send that signal out over the GM high-speed data bus to our ECM. It's going to tell it, hey, I'm down here, I'm hanging out, I am completely cool if this engine cranks over and runs. I see what I want to see. But the ECM goes, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, Dad, you say that, but I got to check Mom. Well, Mom over here, in this case, is our automatic transmission assembly. As long as Mom says we're in Parker neutral, she agrees with Dad. Mr. ECM then goes out and sends a 12-volt output to our control side of the start relay. That start relay sends 12 volts to our starter solenoid. Everybody's happy, it cranks over, it gets its 12 volts. Good to go, right? Basic starter system, nothing too complex. So how would we diagnose that? Well, the cool thing about a OEM like GM, and other manufacturers have this as well, but right here, I have a whole list of available data pits, a scanner reference sheet, so to say. So if I'm attacking a system that I'm not familiar with, and I see, 1, 2, 3 modules in this point, I see 1, 2, 3 modules, however many modules. If I have access to data PIDs that I can look up in service information and see, okay, let me plan out what PID list I'm going to use to diagnose this system. Let me see how much of this I can confirm. Can I confirm PIDs from the ignition switch? If so, where are those ignition switch PIDs coming from? Likely they're coming from the BCM. So I can split the circuit that way. If I have nothing good into the BCM, I can check here, I can check here. I'm not concerned about Mom and Dad talking back and forth. I'm not concerned about the start relay or the starter. Don't care. I break it down to here. I can look at my ECM data PIDs. I can look at my ATA, my automatic transmission assembly. I can do a few things to really narrow it down. It's part of the critical reading. We narrow down what we care about, then we find the easiest way to prove it. To me, the easiest way is almost always sitting on my butt in the seat using a scanner to do the work for me. But this is where critical reading and critical thinking of the system comes into play. So something as simple as a 6-year-old ignition system. Notice how we have green here. Anti-theft, theft deterrent module. Well, what that does, and it will not tell you this in the base starting system theory of operation, you have to go searching for it. You got to use your brain a little bit and think what other inputs and outputs there may be. Well, we have our passkey, and let me say this properly here. This is going to be the passkey 3+. So this system, we have a resistor in the head of the key. There are over 3 trillion possible resistor combinations. That inputs a signal to the TDM module, theft deterrent module, that has a call and response password with the ECM. If that drives, everybody's happy. If it doesn't, this TDM, theft deterrent module, sends out a fuel disable signal to this ECM. You're done, you're bunk. Don't care about ignition switch input, don't care about ECM, don't care about ATA at that point. Thing will crank all day long, it will not fire off because it's disabled the fuel due to the lack of the proper password. If we get the right password, well, this is still a bidirectional comm line, so they go back and forth, they agree completely, everybody's happy, fuel is enabled, and we can continue on with our cranking and go through all our areas again. And once again, that goes back to what data PIDs are available, how the system works, take all the other useless words, information, all the stuff we don't care about, take it out of the system, draw yourself a diagram. I mean, GM has block diagrams available, but different manufacturers set it up differently. But take the time, draw it out, break it down to your bare minimum PIDs, everything you can test easily, and then split the system accordingly. Use all this to go from your big funnel down to the bottom of the funnel where you can make the fewest amount of tests and get the most information possible. So that's that. I mean, this was just a real quick run through. I could go quite a bit longer with all the different variations, how we actually determine what is useful, what isn't, breaking down how sentences are structured, all that. If you guys want to see something like that, let me know down in the comments. If not, no big deal. It's a new way, or it's not a new way, but it's a way to continue thinking about service information to try to make that a more efficient part of your process as well. You're already increasing tooling, you're increasing your own technical abilities, you're learning more and more and more. So why not make yourself more efficient with accessing, reading, understanding, and utilizing service information? Makes your job easier, makes it more fun, makes the customer happy, they're not spending as much, everybody wins. Speaking of utilizing service information and having fun learning and all, Chad over at the Practical Mechanic has been doing some live streams recently. Live vehicle, faulted out, viewer-directed diagnostics. So if you're not already, go over to his channel, like, subscribe, check out a couple of the old live streams, and shoot over there. I mean, practicing all this on your own, practicing it during the day on vehicles as you're trying to get them in and out of the door is great. But he normally does them, I believe it's Friday or Saturday nights. And you can actually interact with a bunch of people, see different diagnostic procedures, break it down, and learn. So go over there, give him a shout, see what he's all about, see what he's doing, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I'll catch you on the next one. Any comments? You want to see more? You want to see different topics covered? We can do that. Absolutely. Just the old like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know. If you guys aren't talking, I don't know what you want. So have a good weekend.